Hi, friends, and welcome to Oli Green. Today, we have with us a person with a very unique profession and who is also very passionate about marine ecosystems. Started his profession as a banker, he worked in Hong Kong for 11 years before deciding to quit and start recreational scuba diving in Goa, India. He joined Barracuda diving, and today he runs the company. He is passionate about marine conservation and founded Coastal Impact with the intention of building awareness about marine ecosystems and motivating people to become divers and ocean ambassadors, as well as join to save Goa's precious marine life. He's an SSI Master Instructor and PADI IDC Staff Inspector. He has been diving since the last 30 years. He has also founded an NGO, Coastal Impact, based out of Goa, aiming to study and monitor our marine ecosystems, support awareness, outreach, research, and conservation actions, and also help build interest and engagement among the local communities. We are proud to present Mr. Venkatesh Chalu, one of the most highly qualified diving inspectors in India. Welcome, Venkat, to Oli Green.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the platform. Very happy to be here.
Okay, can you also introduce your partner, Tanishi?
Yeah, Tan is, the full name is of course Tanishi Kotwal, and she's from Pune, and a very good diver. She is now training to be a dive master, which is the first professional level. So she's been with us now for the last 2.5 months. Hopefully we'll keep her here a little longer. Yeah, and she's heading to Australia or whichever other countries. She's applying for several universities to become a marine biologist. So a very ardently interested in nature. So she's helping also with, she's volunteering for Coastal Impact very actively. And she's an invaluable person right now, who's doing all the underwater work and measuring of coral, all the dirty jobs I don't want to do again.
Okay. Welcome, Tan, to our channel.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start the discussion with a straight question to Venkatesh. From being a professional banker to a professional diver, how did you make that dive?
Very easily, too easily.
Okay. But then
I used to live in Hong Kong for a long time. And,
okay.
I used to love watching underwater documentaries of nature of any kind. And then one fine day, I thought I should go and learn diving. Otherwise, I'll be 92 and on a rocking chair and will regret not having done it. So off I went, joined a class, and then got sucked into the beauty and the amazement of the underwater world. So started joining, and of course, when I was doing my advanced course, I met a girl who became a good friend and who became an instructor in the next 6 months. And she started her own dive center in Hong Kong. And she offered me she offered me something I couldn't turn down, which was basically, she said that I'll do all your courses for free. Just help me out at weekends with the dive center. So I said, okay, great. So then I used to help her out on Saturdays and Sundays, running her dive center. And then I became a dive master. And then I stayed a dive master for 2 years, until then I decided to come back to India. And then in '94, I became an instructor. So that was the path. And then when I decided to come back to India, I'd already decided that this is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to get into any other business. This appealed a lot. Yeah. And at that time, there was not much happening in India in terms of diving. So, sorry, am I preempting your question?
No, you're not.
Yeah. So I actually ended up in Andamans first at the express invitation of your brethren. I'm happy to say, Mr. Vokkam Purushothaman, who was the administrator of Andamans at that time.
Okay.
We were communicating on email, which was still very primitive in those days.
Okay.
And he invited me. He said, "Come down to Andamans and set up a dive center here." So I said, "We have to come and do a recce first." So me and my brother-in-law, armed with our 3 sets of equipment, landed in Port Blair and did some very basic exploration.
Okay.
And then I found that it was really, really primitive in those days. I'm talking about 94.
Okay.
Which was, there was nothing, no infrastructure for tourism, absolutely nothing available.
Okay.
So I figured that if I start there, it would not be good because I was not experienced in diving at that time or running a dive center.
Okay.
So then I visited Goa for the very first time. And Goa was already getting charter flights from mainly from West Europe. And there were a lot of tourists coming.
Okay.
So I decided, okay, I'll join Barracuda Diving, which had started in 1992
Okay.
by a half Goan, half Mumbaiker
Okay.
and British guy at that time.
Okay.
I just joined them because neither of them were instructors. So I joined them as a freelance instructor initially, and then became a partner. So that was the path.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I mean, when you talk about diving, I mean, you said it's not very popular in our part of the world. What were the challenges, the excitement and the challenges and the adventures of diving at that point of time when you joined, and even today?
I think one can learn a lot when seeing what other people are doing wrong.
Okay.
You know? So if you have half a brain, at least you manage to learn how not to do things.
Okay.
And that was pretty much my kind of, because there was nearly really nobody who could teach us anything. You know?
Okay.
I even went and did the equipment servicing course because there was nobody here at that time to service regulators and all the other bits and bobs which go with diving.
Okay.
So it was a nice path. It was I was relatively young, so it was a challenge in many respects because the company at that time did not have a bank account. It did not have a structure. Did not have anything in place.
Okay.
So that was the first thing to do. So I set it up as a partnership between the three of us. Okay. Opened a bank account. Even though we were not required to do audits, got the accounts audited just to keep everything nice and clean.
Okay.
And in those days, there were not that many courses because most of the foreigners were already certified divers.
Okay.
And they did not expect that a dive center would actually be able to teach them diving in India.
Okay.
According to international standards. So that was a bit of a surprise for them, which was good because we were following all the norms, all the standards which were internationally established. So then they would tell their friends, come on, this is a good dive center, so you can learn. It's safe. And that was kind of the stepping stone. So it's always been largely word of mouth advertising for us. Okay. I'm lousy at promoting myself on the social media and all these things. So I just left it to people to kind of sing my praises rather than me trying to do that, okay. Which worked and it kept us busy. And so we grew quite a lot. We were based in those days in Sedate, Goa, which is in the middle of Goa near Panjim.
Okay.
So it's a nice little resort. And we ran a small operation. We've always been relatively small. I didn't want to expand too much and take on more than I can chew. So that's the only way we managed to keep the quality and the reputation intact, if you want to call it that.
I think Tan should be able to tell us more because relatively new diver, her experiences in terms of.
Maybe I shouldn't have invited her on this. I'm opening myself to abuse here.
Dan, can we hear from you?
No. Actually, I sort of got into diving because my dad did his open water course with Venkat way back in 2008. Okay. And I was too young back then, but I was like, no, this is something. I saw how everything was, young and impressionable and all those things. And I saw how things were working and how Venkat is with all the students and all these things. And I was like, no, this is definitely something I want to do. And this is where I want to do it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, and we also found out about Barracuda through somebody else who had done their courses with Venkat. So, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's really word of mouth when it comes to Barracuda, which is a little irritating for our generation because there's no social media presence whatsoever. But yeah,
I'm waiting for you to start that.
I'll try.
But then having joined there, how do you, what is your experience?
So I started diving way back in 2014 is when I did my first course with Barracuda, and I can't explain it. It's more like you do it and then you're just sucked into it. You can't. There's no way out once you've done the dives. There's no way you're gonna go and you say that okay, I'm done. 4 dives is enough. You always want to come back for more. And yeah, I did the open water and I had to convince my parents to let me come for the next level courses and everything. And then eventually they also gave in and they were like, okay, she's really serious about this and this is something she really wants to do. Because, as a teenager, your parents are like, yeah, she wants to do it, doesn't want to do it, don't know. So I had to really convince them. But it helped that, Venkat being the way he is and Barracuda operating the way it does. It's difficult for parents to send, a teenage daughter to Goa alone for her courses or anything like that. But with Venkat around and, the whole environment at Barracuda and Coastal Impact and everything, it's really, it's easier for the parents to send us here. And yeah, that's how I got into this whirlwind of stuff that's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Venkat, I think other than the thrill of going deep sea diving, I think you also got hooked onto the marine ecosystem and the passion for that. Can we know a little more about that?
I was always quite passionate about nature in general,
Okay.
but I think the underwater realm kind of took it to a whole different level because the marine life and the diversity that exists underwater.
Okay.
You could go into a prime rainforest, and if you were to take like a grid of say 1 meter by 1 meter, the amount of life you would see there really pales in comparison compared to what is available underwater.
Okay.
On a healthy reef, there is just mind-blowing number of creatures which are in that one little square meter of area.
Okay.
And the more you look, the more you see, and it's a never-ending learning process.
Okay.
One can never say that I know everything about the ocean because it's so vast. And even in a place like Goa, which unfortunately has got a bad reputation for diving, because of the waters not being clear like, say, Lakshadweep or Andamans. But it's very sad if people stay away because of this reason, because the amount of things we see even underwater in Goa, even in the limited visibility that we have here, is phenomenal.
Okay.
And I've been diving here for 28 years, and I never, it never ceases to amaze me as to how many new creatures keep coming.
Okay.
There are no boundaries underwater, as you know. There are no passports. There are no controls, passport controls or whatever. So you keep seeing new creatures coming, depending on the prevailing currents, depending on the winds. A lot of things keep drifting in. And that's the amazing thing. You never know that today I'm going diving. Yes, I know I will see a lot of my friends who live there underwater, but there are also new friends waiting to be made who come along. So that is the beauty of diving.
When we talk about this diving, how deep and how far do you go from a beach?
No, we don't go from a beach. We actually go by boat.
Okay.
For approximately an hour and 15 minutes. The islands are about 22 kilometers from where we start.
Okay.
But in reality, if you look at it from the mainland, it's only about 3 nautical miles, which is about 4.5 kilometers from the mainland, the closest point, which is Vasco. So, yeah, that gives us enough time to brief people and tell them what we're going to see, the dive procedures, the safety. So we cover all that on the boat while we are going.
Okay.
And then the depth again is not much in Goa. Usually our dive, the maximum depth that we dive to on an average day is only 13 meters. 13.
13 meters from the top sea level.
From the top, yeah, which is say about 40 feet.
Okay.
And that is our deep dive for the day. The other dives are all like 6 meters, 7 meters. Very shallow.
Okay.
So in that respect, Goa is fantastic for learning. And it's a very, very safe environment. There are no strong currents. There's very little surge for most of the season. Because the season is rather short.
Okay.
We start in October and we finish in end of April.
Okay.
Maybe if you're lucky, we go maybe about a week or 15 days into May.
Okay. So just about 6 months. 7 months.
7 months approximately.
Okay. And when you talk about a diving school, I mean, as a total, I simply cannot do any diving. So if I reach there, can I experience it? I mean, because or you do only the teaching part of it.
If you get on a flight immediately after this webinar,
okay,
we'll be here to receive you. How's that? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very easy.
You do try and make visitors also, tourists also experience the diving.
Oh, yeah. Our main business is tourists.
Okay.
Come here, and it's quite amazing how quickly you can learn diving. It's far easier than swimming or even snorkeling.
Okay.
So the only thing you need is a love and respect for the ocean.
Okay.
And, we are all afraid of going into an alien environment. But
correct,
as long as you keep your fear under control and concentrate on what you're doing, then everything falls into place very easily.
And what is the gear for it? You said equipments for diving.
So we have it's a little bit intensive in terms of equipment. You have a mask which you use to create an airspace between your eyes and the water so you can see clearly.
Okay.
Then you have a snorkel which is on the surface. If you're there on the surface, helps you to breathe on the surface.
Okay.
Then you have a jacket which is called a BC, buoyancy compensator, which helps you to stay at whatever level you want.
Okay.
Then you have a regulator system which helps you to deliver the air which is held by the jacket behind your back.
Okay.
And you get the air at pressure. So it's the same air that you're breathing here, except that it doesn't have any moisture.
And are you hooked on to the boat from where you're diving?
No. You're free, totally free.
Okay.
You're hooked on to me.
Okay.
Because for beginners, we always hold them to make sure that you're comfortable and relaxed.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you wear a wetsuit for protection from the elements.
Okay.
Be it like small stinging cells, sometimes you get them in the water, which are not dangerous, but they're a little bit, scratchy and itchy.
Okay.
And then you have fins on your feet, which you wear for propulsion.
Correct. Yeah.
And a weight belt, which helps to get you downward and keep you downward.
Okay.
So in essence, this is all you need.
And how do you get back? You go down all the way?
Swim up.
Oh,
swim out. Yeah.
Okay.
You have enough air in your jacket for what we call neutral buoyancy. That means it stops you from sinking any further.
Okay.
And then when you want to come up, you just move your legs and come up.
So it doesn't require any experience in swimming also.
So the certification requirement is there. There is a 200-meter swim that you need to do continuously, but there is no time limit on it.
Okay.
Even if you're a poor swimmer, you can still finish it. And you have to float or tread water for 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
That is the only requirement. In the event you're not a good swimmer and you're not confident, you can also use the fins and mask, but you need to swim for 300 meters with that.
Okay.
Basically, it is not to check your swimming skills, but it's to check your fitness level.
Okay. You were mentioning about master diver. So who gives these certifications? I mean, what is the certification?
There are several bodies abroad, none in India, unfortunately, at the moment.
Okay.
Which are like universities, if you want to call it that. Okay. So the biggest one is called PADI, Professional Association of Diving Instructors, and they're based in US, in California.
Okay.
They probably have about, I'm taking a guess, but probably about 50 to 55% of the market share, even today.
Okay.
And the second one, second largest one is called SSI, which is Scuba Schools International. They are headquartered in Germany.
Okay.
And they also started actually in US.
Okay.
But now they have grown quite big, and they have been kind of expanding rapidly. So,
Okay.
for example, in Australia, they are number one. They've
Oh.
beaten Paddy also.
Okay.
In Europe, also, they are very, very quickly becoming number one.
And you are affiliated to both of them?
Yeah, I'm an instructor with both of them.
Okay.
Although the dive center now I've retained only SSI as a dive center.
Okay.
Because having a dual dive center rating costs a lot of money, number one.
Okay.
And secondly, I feel I can offer a relatively, I would not say cheaper, but I would say a more valued package with SSI, because they're a little bit smaller, they're a little bit more personalized in their approach, even now. And the study material is virtually everything is available online.
Okay.
So we request all students to do the studies online before they actually come to Goa, so that they don't waste their time sitting here, and reading a book or watching a video. So that takes a lot of the theoretical part out of the way.
Okay.
And we can concentrate more on like swimming pool training first,
Okay.
and then we take you to the sea.
On a professional front, other than the training part of it, is there any competition, international competitions or something like that for a professional diver?
No, this is a sport. This is a sport which is purely for self. How should I say? Competition.
Okay.
The competition is only within you. How far you want to go, what you want to achieve, which places you want to go and dive in the world, is all within yourself. So let's say 10 people are on the course. There is no time limit. There is no competition between one person completing a skill before the other or anything like that.
Okay. So on a career level, it is only the training. On a career
level, yes, primarily, but you do have underwater photographers who specialize in photography, videography, filmmakers. You have there are other branches of diving, but they're not related to what we do. We do what is called recreational scuba diving.
Okay.
Yeah, but the other branches are like, for example, the Navy has got its own divers.
Okay.
And that training is like apples and oranges, completely different.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the third branch is commercial diving, where people learn diving for work underwater, like laying of pipes, inspecting ships underwater, laying telecommunication cables, all kinds of work-related stuff.
That again
that is completely different from what we do.
Okay.
Essentially, our job is to train you as a diver so that you can develop it as a hobby, as a sport.
Okay. Okay.
The other branch of that is the professional level, which is becoming an instructor so that you can teach other divers.
But then, when you started talking about marine ecosystems, when you said from a passion or rather hobby kind of a thing to having a serious concern about marine ecosystems, how did that happen? I mean, you said you're an even otherwise nature lover.
Correct. So when I was running Barracuda, we used to already do underwater and beach cleanups.
Okay.
To remove all the rubbish which was there, which was sometimes thrown by the snorkeling boats or the island picnic boats which used to come there, So people used to carelessly discard like beer bottles and cans and all kinds of rubbish.
Okay.
So the last Sunday of April, we made it mandatory to have a cleanup.
Okay.
And we would invite divers as well as non-divers.
Okay.
So at one point in time, it got so big that we took 65 people to the island.
Okay.
In about 4 or 5 boats. And the non-divers were, of course, cleaning the beach. Everything was coordinated. We had supervisors for every group of 4 or 5 people. And the underwater teams comprised of 2 divers with 1 staff member.
Okay.
And they would just go out with bags underwater even, and they would collect all this rubbish. All that rubbish would be brought back to the beach, where the other non-divers were also cleaning up. And everything was kind of collected in one place.
Okay.
And we would tabulate all that, estimate the total weight, etc., and then carry it back to the mainland for disposal.
Okay.
So this was kind of a primitive way of my giving back to the environment.
Okay.
It's not that it would have made a huge difference, but the idea was to promote marine awareness, marine conservation awareness. So, which was a good way of spreading the message. And then one fine day I was diving and I came across a big, beautiful angelfish which was caught in a net. It was still alive. Now, these are called ghost nets, which are abandoned by the fishermen because they are entangled in rocks or whatever. The fishermen can't pull them out. So they leave the net. So, but unfortunately, these nets continue to kill because they're still there. They're still hanging vertically, and they trap the fish and the fish can't get out. So when we see scenes like this, then we always go and release the fish because it's of no use to kill it. Nobody's going to eat it and it's a complete waste of life.
Correct.
So this fish, I was alone. I freed the fish and he was so tired, he could not even swim away. So he just lay in my hand for a few seconds. And then finally he caught his breath and then he swam away. And I just waited and watched him and he came right back. And I put my hand up and he literally came and rubbed himself there as if to say thank you. And it just kind of blew me away. It was like, I would never have believed it if somebody else had told me this. But it happened to me.
Okay.
And that, I guess, probably was a
turning point,
if you want to call it that, where I decided that there should come a time when I'm going to give back to the ocean because it's given me so much over the years.
Okay.
So if I can think of one defining moment, that was probably it. And it was good to release something alive for a change, into the ocean rather than us killing all the time.
Okay. I think that brings us to the coastal impact. The
NGO, yes.
Yeah, your passion for marine ecosystem. What exactly do you do in coastal impact? Do you do any documentation of the ecosystem?
Yeah. So first of all, I must clarify, I'm not a marine biologist. I don't intend to be a marine biologist.
Yes.
all that drives me is passion and my limited knowledge of what I know about the sea, practically.
Okay.
So, but it's very interesting because it keeps you learning.
Okay.
And you can see my white hair, but actually it's all because of tan and people like that. I'm only 16 years old.
Okay.
Yeah? But it's good to keep learning because I think that's what keeps the gray cells going. Otherwise one tends to become complacent and then you become like a horse with blinkers.
Okay.
You stop learning. So that's why I love interacting with youngsters like that because they come there, they have their own set of knowledge, which I'm always learning from as well. And it's a two-way process. And it helps a lot because their perspective is completely different from what I've seen in my life. Okay. And that's a very fresh perspective that's steeped in current knowledge, about technology, about current research. So like Tan, for example, she's really interested in the environment. So she spends her own time and effort in learning, in reading, in trawling the internet, whatever. Okay. So I'll throw a question at her, which I don't want to be bothered with searching on the net. And she goes and she researches extensively, comes back. Then we discuss about it, and then we think about what we can do next. So Coastal Impact actually was set up a long time ago. It was set up in 2008. Okay. And I did precious little because I had absolutely no time. Okay. During the season, I was just too busy running the dive center with courses, with pleasure divers. But then I was lucky enough to have the monsoons, which were from say May till the end of September. Okay. And that gave me a lot of free time in those days to go to the local schools and colleges. And I had prepared a small rudimentary kind of slideshow, for marine awareness. So I would go and I would do that presentation in schools and colleges and try and get people involved. So people would get really interested. They've come and joined us on the cleanups. They keep throwing questions at me. Most of the time, I don't know the answers. So I go and try and find out the answer. Then I come back and again tell them. Among my friends, I was lucky enough to have a lot of marine biologists.
Okay.
And also over the years, I've been very lucky to train a lot of marine biologists in diving. Mostly they came from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
Yeah, there seems to be a huge crop of marine biologists always graduating from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
So it was great for me to keep telling them that, all your predecessors used to do was sit in the lab and look at test tubes.
Okay.
But you guys are the new breed because you're actually going down underwater and physically seeing what is down there. Okay. And you see 10 times or 100 times more than what I see because you are trained for that. Right? So it was quite amazing. It was always, like I said, a two-way learning process. And for example, one fish which I used to look at, and I used to think it's a particular type of fish. And when I did a survey, an underwater marine survey with an American marine biologist, and when we came up and I told him it is this, he said, no, it's not that, it is this.
Okay.
And I was like, all these years I've been thinking it is this species.
Okay.
So again, you have to change your ways. You have to accept new knowledge which comes your way, which was great.
Tan, I think you are also very much associated with Coastal Impact. Can we hear from you? Because he said, you do the dirty work, which he prefers not to.
No, he's just being modest. To be honest, he does.
She relishes it. That's the thing. She relishes the dirty work.
Okay.
Because she's a researcher.
Can we hear from you?
I hope to be someday.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I've always been interested a lot in the marine life. I don't know. I used to be a swimmer. I'm a formal national level swimmer. So there was some draw towards the water, from way before when I was really young. And it was like a really natural transition for me to go from swimming to go into diving. And I don't want to sound like I'm just singing praises of Venkat, but to be honest, it was literally the way he talks about it and the way he, maybe the briefing that he gives you on the boat, he explains, okay, you're going to see this fish or that fish, and this is what it looks like, and it's so pretty, and this and that. And even before I got into the water for my first dive, I was like, yeah, this is amazing. This is exciting. This is so cool. And the sad part actually is that even in the small amount of years that I've actually been diving on these sites, and I have seen a lot of difference. I don't want to say degrade, but there's been changes. COVID did help, but there's been quite a few changes, even in the few years that I've been diving here. So when I did come for my professional course right now, I came on the 15th of October, and Venkat said that you guys are helping us with Coastal Impact. I was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. Come on, let's go. This is something new, and I really love learning new things. So I was like, yeah, let's do this. Come on. And we went down for the first dive, and we were checking on the corals that they've transplanted and everything, and just seeing all the things, how much change there's been in just these 2 years, and the difference, both positive and negative, that COVID has given, the impact. Okay. And I was like, this is something that it needs attention. I myself am a graduate in zoology, and, studying corals in the textbook or in the lab, versus actually seeing them in the sea, it's a completely different experience in itself. And for me at least, until you experience it firsthand, or at least see something about it, the way Venkat's, spreading the awareness, okay, you're not going to understand the impact, coastal impact, that this, what we're doing is having. So, for me, it was, yes, definitely majorly Venkat. And I did have an inherent interest in learning a lot of new things. So every time he throws a project at me, I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go. Let's figure this out. Let's find out. Let's read the research papers. Let's check up stuff online. And in our generation, it's so easy to learn anything. You just Google it, okay, or you just go to YouTube and be like, how to do this. And everything's there. The information's all there for you. So it's very easy to learn things. And I love learning new things. So for me, being with Venkat and the opportunities he gives me is very great.
On that point, you mentioned about research and research paper project. Is it an awareness part that Coastal Impact is doing, or is there hands-on process that you're doing?
Okay, so
Because I also couldn't pick up much info from the website. I went through the Coastal Impact website. I couldn't pick up much info.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that Venkat just does, tells me about, and I'll be, for example, there was one topic that we spoke about, which was coral spawning. So it's basically, so corals can reproduce both sexually and asexually. And the sexual reproduction that takes place happens maybe just once a year. And it's this really beautiful, I cannot describe it. I have not seen it, unfortunately, live. And we were just discussing this because there is no recorded information about this on the Indian coastline. And we were just discussing this, and then I said, okay, let's go, let's check, let's see what information is there. Just Google this. You just go to Google Scholar and you just Google the coral spawning, and that's it. And you get so much information about this. And that's the kind of stuff that I like to check out, because understanding these things, documenting these things, even if I'm not actually doing any new research, as long as I'm just getting some data and, putting it out there for maybe other scientists or future scientists, what you need is data. What they need is data, which they don't have, which anyone can do. You can do, I can do. You don't have to be a scientist for that. So it's not just really like going hardcore science or, research or anything like that. It's what you have interest in. And the more we spread the awareness, the more people will be interested in that, and they'll think about these things. The minute you start thinking about this, half the problems, you start thinking of solutions, and that's you're halfway there. So it's not purely scientific as such. It's up to you what you want to do, especially in this day and age.
Venkat, in the website, it was mentioned engaging the local public.
Yes.
So what is that? What are the activities that you mainly do?
When you talk about local public, now the world has become a really small place.
Correct.
So local, I would include the whole of India.
Okay.
Our webinars are primarily aimed at anybody and everybody all over India, particularly in the small places where there is lack of awareness. Okay. Today with the TV, for example, programs like channels like National Geographic, like Discovery and Animal Planet, there's a lot of awareness already there.
Okay.
But to do it in the Indian context, it's difficult, because although there are filmmakers in India who are concentrating on wildlife programs and local wildlife, if you want to call it that, but underwater there is very little material available.
Okay.
So my focus has always been to concentrate on even a simple small place like Goa.
Okay.
And getting people to know, because I have a common joke with my Goan friends, right? I always tell them the only fish is the one which is on your plate, right? But there are so many more species which are not commercial species, which are in the local waters, and that is the true wealth of Goa.
Okay.
The natural wealth.
Okay.
Plus, a lot of people just ask me, is there any coral in Goa? And to me, or if you have dived, it's a completely ridiculous question. There's something like 24 species of coral, 24 to 30 species of coral, right? Okay. Primarily hard coral, but then you also do have soft coral, you have sponges, you have a huge biodiversity down there. Okay. So I've done a lot of kind of underwater surveys for marine biologists, where they have collected the information and they have published papers on that. Okay. And today, slowly, it's getting known.
Okay.
What is actually down there.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned about the deep sea diving in Goa, Lakshadweep and Andamans, I believe.
Yes.
Is there any other place in India which has this facility?
Growing by the day. You have diving in Chennai, you have diving in Pondicherry, you have diving in Cochin, you have diving even in Dwarka.
Okay. So
yeah. But I mean, these are mushrooming everywhere.
Okay.
And they're giving a chance for people to actually go down physically yourself and see what is down there, which is the good part of it. Yeah.
So you have operations anywhere else?
No. I am. Yeah, I have enough on my plate with Goa.
Okay.
And, also with Coastal Impact, because that is a lot of work. An NGO is an unbelievable amount of work.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Before I come back to you with the same question, let me ask Tan first. It'll be the same question to you also.
I just said this is a really difficult question, actually.
I know.
For me, I guess it would probably just be, to just keep your eyes open, breathe, and just look at the world from a different perspective, because that's going to happen. The minute you go down, just keep your eyes open, be alert, look and see everything, see as many things as you can, because there's so much that you're going to miss out. You cannot cover everything in one dive. So yeah, for me, it's just going to be that, and the rest will just follow. It just happens. It's a natural process. The minute you see all these things, you're going to feel something for it, and you're going to work proactively to maybe make some difference over there.
Okay. Venkat, the same question, but with a little addition. I mean, what is it that you need to be prepared with when you actually get into this passion?
What's inside here? You need passion.
Okay.
Without passion, you cannot do anything. Okay. Impossible. You can be paid $1 million to do something, but if your heart is not in it, you're not going to give it the best. And on the other hand, you could be given nothing, but you would do unbelievable work if you had a passion, genuine passion. So I always tell people, a lot of people wonder why the hell we dive.
Okay.
What's so alluring about the oceans and the seas? So I will just tell a fact, a simple fact, which will make people much more connected, even if they're coming from landlocked places, is that a less known fact is that 70% of your oxygen that you're breathing actually is generated by the oceans. Okay. There is a wrong, mistaken belief that we are fed every single day, that the trees, the forests are primarily responsible for the oxygen. It's not the case. The oceans generate that. Now, sadly, they are, out of sight and out of mind, which is the general thing that happens, particularly when you're coming from a landlocked place. So once you realize this simple fact, you will immediately think, oh my God, and we are polluting the ocean so much. We are putting plastic, we are putting all the rubbish, we are flushing sewage straight into the oceans, and this is what is happening. So if you realize the enormity of the situation today, you will automatically connect with the problem, and you will automatically connect with the solution, or you will look for solutions. And before it's too late, you will start doing something about it as well. You don't have to do it individually. You'll join organizations which are doing something about it already.
Okay.
Or a collective group of friends, whoever, however.
Okay.
And in your own place. You don't even have to go to the sea to do this. You can do it right from where you are.
Correct. Yes.
So it's time to get off your high knee and do something about it. Because every single day now counts. We are hearing bad news every single time from every single source of media you can think of. And it's very depressing. It's demoralizing. Okay. Some days you feel like just digging a 6-foot hole and just burying yourself inside that. But there is a lot of hope. And that hope is right here in the form of Tan. You and me are going to kick the bucket in the next 10, 15 years, whatever. But the new generation is what has to take it forward.
Exactly.
So if at Coastal Impact, if we can ignite that passion, I think we have achieved what we want to achieve. And that's why marine conservation awareness is the main need of the day. I cannot do huge projects like scientists or whatever, but in our own way, for example, we have kickstarted quite a few programs, if I may mention those here.
Okay.
Coral transplantation is what Tan touched on. So basically, we are transplanting the coral from a healthy area to an area where perhaps the coral are dying or they are absent from that particular place. So we grow the transplanted corals for X amount of time until they become big enough And then the idea is to transplant them back onto the reef. So they become a part of the natural reef system.
Okay.
So this is one of the things we've done 1 year of work on this, which was funded by an organization called the Habitats Trust. So that grant period is over, and then we found ourselves in the middle of COVID with no funding, right? So I thought about it and I decided, okay, why don't we just get the coral adopted?
Okay.
So Abraham doesn't have his dog. He's lost his dog. He's really upset. So Abraham should adopt a coral and name it after his dog. Why not? In memory of his dog. So individuals as well as corporates can adopt maybe one fragment of coral or a tile which has got 4 fragments or an entire table which is 48 pieces of coral. So we put that out and the response has been fairly good. We have managed to collect almost about 3 lakhs, 3.5 lakhs of rupees. So that goes back into the project for maintenance of the coral, for going and cleaning off all the algae, which we try and do at least once a month, taking the measurements of the coral to see that it's growing, how much it is growing.
Okay.
If there are small dead pieces of coral, then we scrape them off. We put live pieces again to keep it. It's almost like what you would call coral gardening.
Oh, okay.
So you have to tend to that garden all the time. Otherwise, it dies or it might languish. So that is the whole idea. So this is what we go down with a whole bunch of volunteers. And we are doing this. We take photographs, we take videography of all the tables, all the corals. Right now, we've got 192 pieces of coral down there.
Okay.
Out of which 77 have already been adopted.
Okay.
So we are hoping
regular monitoring of this also.
Yeah. Every single month.
Okay.
Maybe more if possible.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have to do this.
Okay.
And then we have our own WhatsApp group for coastal impact, where there are a lot of people, including marine biologists, lay persons, people from every walk of life who are interested mainly in marine life.
Okay.
And you keep posting all that information, that all the data is uploaded onto the Google Drive. It's there for everybody to see. Whoever is interested can go and have a look at it. And when people adopt something, then it becomes like a personal connection.
Yeah.
And they want to see how their coral is doing. They want to look at that photograph.
Okay.
And they start telling other people, hey, I've adopted a coral. I've named it Tom, Dick, Harry, whatever. Right? So that's how it develops. So you don't have to be a diver. If you are a diver, well and good. But if you're not a diver, you can still adopt your piece of coral. So we call this program Coral Crusaders.
Oh, okay. Part of Coastal Impact itself.
Yeah. These are all programs we've started under Coastal Impact.
Right. Okay.
Then the second one we started was primarily aimed at divers.
Okay.
But for example, if Abraham is not a diver, Abraham can come to Goa and learn diving.
Okay.
And then we take them diving on the coral that they have adopted or they want to see.
Okay.
So many people get very interested and they volunteer. I get at least 15, 20 applications for volunteers every single month.
Okay.
Right? Because they are all very keen on getting involved. They want to go down, they want to look at the coral, they want to see how they can contribute and help.
Okay.
So we called it Marine Monitors. Now there is something called citizen science. You might be aware of that.
Okay.
It is on land as well as underwater. Because the area underwater is so vast. Scientists cannot be in every place. So they request divers to go down and just do a pleasure dive. But while they are doing a pleasure dive, to note down what fish they see, how many species of fish, what is the volume of the fish, how many different numbers, what is the type of coral they see, is there anything unusual they found out, noticed. So these changes are recorded by lay persons like me. Okay. And we come back and we collect all this information. And now the next step, what we are trying to research, is to find a global website where all this data is uploaded.
Okay.
Which will be available to any and every scientist. It's an open source data. So with that information, they can look at the broader picture. They can look at the entire Earth.
Okay.
Sitting in one small place in front of a computer. And they can say, okay, in this area, coral is dying. In this area, coral is actually
improving,
regrowing, if you want to call it that. these species of corals have become extinct from a certain place. This fish was never recorded in this place, but now we are seeing data on that.
Okay.
So they're all indicators of what is actually happening underwater, and therefore the primary indicator of climate change,
Okay.
which is the ultimate picture.
Correct.
So it's a huge wealth of information which people are doing in many parts of the earth, which is citizen science movement.
Okay.
And so we decided we'll also introduce that here. And we called it Marine Monitors.
Okay.
So that way, anybody who gets involved, they actually pay for the dive. They get a full briefing about what the program is all about, what they can expect to see down there, what is the method we use for doing this survey. And one of us, the staff members or one of the volunteers also goes with them so that they can guide them and help in collecting the data.
Okay.
Now, when you come back and we will ask them to put all the data into the computer on the global database so they can actually see something tangible actually happening. Then the same diver might come back next month or after 2 or 3 months, and they're diving the same dive site.
Okay.
And they're collecting the information again, and now they have a baseline. They have a dive which they did 3 months ago, and they can compare it to what they're seeing today.
Okay.
And whether it is bad news or good news, I believe it is still good news. Because if something is going bad, at least we know it is going bad. And maybe there is something we can do to address that problem, which is also positive. If it is going for the better, great. That means things are progressing well. Maybe we are doing something right as humanity in improving the health of the oceans and thereby helping ourselves survive.
Correct. Yeah.
So these are the things that we're looking at. Recently, we went to Kumta in Karnataka. One of my students was setting up a seaweed farm.
Okay.
The seaweed farms are awesome. They're very prevalent on the east coast along Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
But none is available on the west coast. So this was like a pilot project, and she wanted our help in installing you have to put anchors down.
Okay.
To anchor the raft, which we tie on the top.
Okay.
And from this floats on the top, of course. And then from that, they put down ropes into which this seaweed is plucked.
Okay.
And then the seaweed grows.
What does it use for, seaweed?
It's an awesome method of giving alternate employment to fishers.
Okay.
You know about overfishing, what is happening in the oceans nowadays.
Right.
All the fish are being depleted. There's not enough fish. The fish that you're eating is leading to cancer because of microplastics accumulation in the fish, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So this is an awesome way of supplementing their income and slowly weaning them off fishing. So if it is a successful project, that seaweed which grows is harvested and sold to pharmaceutical companies, sold to the food industry, and sold to the cosmetics industry.
Oh, okay.
Where various products are used as raw material to build up. And also in the process, you can grow oysters on the same ropes, which is again income for them. And also it becomes a breeding ground and a nursery for small fish.
Okay.
It provides shelter and food.
Okay.
So there are a lot of benefits to that. And it's a huge carbon sink. The biggest thing is it's a big carbon sink, which is absorbing all the carbon that we are putting into the environment, which is leading to the climate change. So there are many, many benefits. Yeah.
Fine. I think we have had almost an hour of real.
I can keep going. Stop me.
I can really see that passion, really see that spark in your eyes.
I'll wait for you to come down. We have to take you down personally and then show you.
We'll do that. Yes, sure. Okay. Thanks a lot, both Venkat and Tan. Having you, Tan, here was a real good experience in terms of listening to a fresh.
That is the icing on the cake.
Correct. For me, it was like really a good experience. Thanks a lot, both of you.
Thank you very much.